Did you ever hear the story about how Barack Obama had the country's most powerful bankers in the palm of his hand? A moment when he could have extracted any concessions from them he wanted, and he blew it? It all happened at the very beginning of his first administration. Hope and change. Did you realize that there are two giant awards given out in Cannes? There's the film festival everybody knows about, where Hollywood likes to unveil its early Oscar contenders and other big titles in front of a fancy international audience in the south of France. There's also the Cannes Lions International Festival of Creativity winners. It's probably the most prestigious award in the advertising industry. Barack Obama won that award for his Hope and Change political campaign the same year he won the Nobel Peace Prize. The same year he was sworn in as president for the first time. Quite a winning streak. Hope and Change was an ad slogan, like, just do it. Hope and Change were the sales pitch to the American public, and we gobbled it right up. But was it anything more than a sales pitch? Well, it turns out when Obama had an opportunity to make some real changes, he wimped out. Big time. Our hope for change was tossed by the wayside pretty quickly. Obama was sworn in January 20th, 2009. By March 27th, 2009, he sold us out, barely 2 months later. How did he do that? It so happens that the U.S. was in the midst of the biggest financial crisis since the stock market crash of 1929. Shit was getting very real. You see, the housing bubble burst in 2007. For years, people had bought into this idea that housing prices could only ever go up. But we've known since before Isaac Newton that what goes up must come down. When housing prices finally did reverse course, it took the banking industry by surprise and quickly decimated the subprime mortgage industry. Some banks were heavily invested in the subprime housing market and started hemorrhaging money. Bear Stearns, which had been around since 1923, started to go under, so JP Morgan Chase bought them for a song. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, two federal mortgage insurers, were seized by the government, nationalized. Lehman Brothers, which had been around since 1850, went belly up. The Federal Reserve bailed out AIG, the biggest insurance company in the United States. Banks were threatening to fail all over the place. It was terrifying. On October 10, 2008, barely a month before the presidential election, the Dow Jones Industrial Average had the worst week in its history, losing more than 20% of its value. It looked like we were staring down the barrel of another Great Depression. On the campaign trail, Obama said he wanted to get tough on Wall Street and reform the banks. So Barack Obama wins, our knight in shining armor, promising hope and change. Whom did he select as his point man who would help guide us through this dark and dangerous night to a bright new dawn? He chose Timothy Geithner as his Treasury Secretary, president of the New York Federal Reserve, a protege of Clinton Treasury Secretary Bob Rubin, and a consummate Wall Street insider. Now, the public had not been loving these bank bailouts that had been unfolding in the final months of the George W. Bush administration. Bailouts that Timothy Geithner had been instrumental in facilitating, by the way. There are protests in the street. Congress calls the bankers to testify, where they admit that the banks had taken billions in bailouts and handed a generous portion to their top executives as bonus compensation. This just made the public even more outraged. So here's the best part. By the way, if you're interested in a much more detailed version of this story, please check out Frontline's fantastic documentary, Money, Power, and Wall Street, Part 3, which is the basis for much of this post. On March 27, 2009, Barack Obama summons the heads of the 13 biggest remaining banks in the country to the White House. Vikram Pandit of Citigroup, a bank that had just received a $306 billion bailout, is there. Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase and Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs are there too, of course, as well as Ken Lewis of Bank of America. Truly a rogues gallery. These men, sometimes known as masters of the universe, were the weakest they had ever been. As they trudged up to the White House, the mood was very much one of heading to the woodshed for a serious thrashing. They were not looking forward to this meeting at all. They were nervous, and with good reason. Remember, the public was steaming. They were expecting the bankers to pay. The bankers were expecting dramatic reforms, possibly an end to too big to fail, limits on executive compensation, help for homeowners who were underwater on their mortgages. Anything could be on the table. It wasn't looking good for them. Obama strides into the meeting with a grim look on his face. Getting right down to business, he tells them, "We're between you and the pitchforks." The bankers were ready to give up whatever they must to keep from being destroyed. Then Obama stuns them all, saying, "What we have, gentlemen, is a public relations disaster that's turning into a political disaster, and I'm here to help." I'm sure you could have heard a pin drop. With the full support of the public, Obama could have written his own ticket. It was within his grasp to make important changes to protect the public from being taken advantage of by the banks. He did not. In my opinion, too big to fail is too big to exist. Obama did not feel that way. He was more than willing to listen to his Treasury Secretary, a man whose entire existence has been spent serving the interests of wealthy bankers, and do everything in his power not to fix a broken system, but to repair it and smooth every rough edge, ultimately exposing all of us to the same risks again. He had the perfect opportunity for retribution and justice, and instead, he chose to play nice. It shouldn't be a complete surprise. During the 2008 campaign, Obama raised more money from the finance, insurance, and real estate sector, commonly known as Wall Street, than even George W. Bush had. His biggest political investors worked for Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan Chase, and of course, Silicon Valley. After he gave bankers that big wet kiss in the White House, Wall Street was responsible for fully 1/3 of his re-election war chest. So we can't pretend like there wasn't some personal motivation for Obama to be extra sweet to his wealthiest supporters. That was a pivotal moment in March of 2009. Obama had the bankers right where we wanted them. It was a great opportunity. Don't forget, the Democrats had complete dominance in Congress at that moment as well. Obama could have made any change he wanted, and he didn't. The bankers were there, in the woodshed, their pampered bottoms exposed and ready for the switch. Instead, Obama said, "What can I do to help?" Think about that the next time you think the Democrats might be rushing to help you. The two-party system does not exist to serve us. Please give a like, follow, favorite, and subscribe to my free Substack, where you can get a lot more detail in every post. Let's make them pay.